evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order and welcome you to the Hampden-Wilbraham Regional School District School Committee meeting. It is 6:30 p.m. I see that David Sanders from Wilbraham Public Access Channel is recording. Is there anyone else here recording this meeting? We will do roll call in alphabetical order. Cheryl Caruana? Here. Tim Collins? Present. Sean Kennedy?
Here.
Lisa Murray? Here. Rich Whitaker?
Here.
Mike Tirabassi? And Michelle Boudreau here. If you would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Levis.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Begin with the proposed amendment changes of the regional agreement. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Directing your attention.
Yeah, we have some.
I apologize.
Sorry.
The other boards, Wilbraham Select Board. Would you like to call your name? My apologies.
I will call the Wilbraham Select Board to order. Thank you.
We don't have a quorum, it'll just be Brian and I, including you.
Okay, directing your attention to my February 3rd memo and the most up-to-date version of the proposed modifications or restatement to the regional agreement. I thought what might be most helpful, especially for those who are not here with us tonight, is just to go through the changes very quickly and then be here to answer any questions. As indicated in the memo, we've been involved with an interactive process with the state for about a year now, and I would say that this agreement has gone through several iterations of changes based on feedback from the Office of Regional Governance. At this point, you'll note that many of the changes that are being proposed here are changes that are required to bring the agreement into conformity with regulatory or statutory changes that have taken place since the last update. The actual part that I think the school committee is seeking to modify is somewhat modest as compared to the rest, but when you change an agreement, you have to change the whole thing so that it conforms to the current laws and regulations because, as I've said many times, there are several parties to this agreement. It's the school committee, the two towns, and the commissioner, and one of the things that the commissioner will require is that the agreement is up to date with respect to regulations. So, getting right to it, the first change, which is one of the substantive changes, is in the first paragraph of the preamble. It would specify that residents of member towns who are enrolled in grades 6 to 12 shall attend schools in the district as designated by the committee. Then, in the second paragraph, the recommendation from the Office of Regional Governance was to tell the entire history of the agreement. The agreement was actually first entered into in 1956 and then was amended in 1994 and further amended in 2015. And so the change there is just to clarify the entire history of the agreement. Moving on to section 1, there's been a lot of discussion about two components of section 1. One is the beginning of terms, and the other is the one person, one vote U.S. constitutional requirement. So the first change noted here is not really a change in practice. The practice of the committee has been for members to take their seats on July 1st, in the year in which they're elected. However, in order to do that, it should be reflected in the agreement that that's when the terms begin, and it needs to be made clear to the candidates and to the voters on the ballot that the terms don't commence immediately. So this is just language that clarifies that we're going to continue our current process and make the proper notifications. Next is the methodology for for compliance with the one person, one vote U.S. constitutional requirement. There are various methods by which a regional committee can implement that requirement, and the one chosen by this school committee is to do weighted voting. So the overall composition of the committee would remain the same, but votes would be weighted to reflect the populations of the towns. Did have some more conversation with regional governance on that, and they want some more information about the actual the number that we're going to use in order to determine what the total populations of the towns are. So we're still working that out, but that is the methodology the school committee has chosen to comply with that. Moving on to section C. This is just in addition to codify current practice of the school committee, which is to appoint members to the subcommittees at their annual organizational meeting. We have a policy that empowers the school committee to appoint subcommittees at their organizational meeting. It's just a recommendation of regional governance that we also reflect that in the regional agreement. So this is just a sentence or two added to reflect the policy. Moving on to section 2. Again, you see a repetition of residents of member towns in grades 6 through 8 shall attend schools within the district as designated by the committee. And then later on it says that residents in grades 9 through 12 will attend Minnetonka Regional High School. This next section is in purple, as indicated in the memo I sent 2 days ago. These additional purple changes are based on the conversation that I had with regional governance on Monday. And I should say that most of this section is in purple only because it's being changed from one part of the agreement to another part of the agreement. In a previous version, the exceptions were listed under elementary schools. However, they pointed out that the exceptions could apply to students in any grade, such as students being placed in a different school because of special education needs. And so the recommendation was to segregate all that language into one section called exceptions. And then there is another part of this which, no, not on that yet. Okay, next is to the lease of the schools. This section is rewritten to clarify how the lease takes place. You know, I think other parts of the agreement in the prior version had talked about leases, and it used different language, and so the language here is just being brought into conformity with section 14C of chapter 71 of MGL. And the other change in this is the elimination of TWB as one of the schools.
I think you made it still about
You are correct. We'll have to add Stony Hill into. And then we come in the next purple section, what was formerly referred to as paragraph 23. Still working. Just died. Formerly known as paragraph 23, I do expect it'll be one of the sections that receives a good deal of attention tonight. This is new language which is intended to deal with capital costs in a building in which all of the students from both towns attend. Originally it had said a school where 100% of students from member towns in an assigned grade attend. However, one of the members of the planning committee pointed out that might not be the best language, because if you have a student who's placed out of district, for example, or a student who's attending a vocational school or some other school other than that school, someone might argue that provision doesn't apply. And so this is a revised version. The new language, proposed language says, when the district assigns students from any grades from both member towns to a single building, which single school building is a leased building, that building will be treated as a district-owned building and capital cost will be apportioned in the same manner as a district-owned building. The fact that certain students from any of those grades may not be assigned or may be assigned elsewhere to accommodate such things as special education needs shall not affect this language. And then I'll also note, in our conversation, they said that the Office of Regional Governance said that they might like to see this paragraph moved to a different section, but that would be for a future iteration of this. Just pointing that out because that is new language. So then the next section is G, vocational students. Under the statutory method for assigning costs of vocational schools to students who reside in regional districts, member towns are essentially responsible for those costs. However, the practice of the district has been to embed those costs as an operating cost of the district and then to share them according to the formula that splits costs between the two towns. So this is new language that actually reflects what our practice has been. The old language in the agreement basically reflects the language of the statute, which is not what our practice was. So then we move on to section 4. Main change with section 4 is that it includes the option to implement an alternative assessment method based on a 3-year rolling average. It also includes the statutory assessment method because anytime you implement or have an agreement that contemplates the implementation of an alternate assessment method, you have to have the statutory assessment method as a default because anytime you implement the alternate assessment method, the towns need to agree to it. If they don't agree, then you revert back to the statutory method, which is why both are shown there. In section H, they just recommended some streamlined language. We had sort of a lengthy paragraph there describing how excess and deficiency funds should be maintained. Their recommendation was just to put with directives from the Department of Revenue consistent with MGL so that we could say that we will align to the requirements for E&D funds rather than creating some other language which may become out of date as the regulations governing those funds changes. So then in transportation, again, you'll see that some of the new language, which was proposed language, they recommended revising. So this whole thing based on the ratio that the member town's funding enrollment bears to the total foundation, that repeats in several times of the agreement. Their recommendation based on experience is if you're going to use the same language in multiple sections of the agreement, it's better just to reference it in case there's a copy and paste error. We just replaced all that in accordance with section 4F, which is where all that language was taken from. In section 6, the observation was that we refer to the towns as member towns throughout the rest of the agreement, so just adding member there for consistency. And then this was probably the most substantive part of our conversation on Monday, which was to talk about withdrawal. The previous language in the regional agreement is really language that's more apropos to a regional agreement that has 3 or more towns, because it talks about the possibility of one town withdrawing from the agreement. However, since this is a 2-member town, if either town agrees, then that terminates the district. So they propose just to have much simpler language saying that, you know, if the withdrawal, if either town withdraws, then the district ceases to exist. However, that triggers a number of regulations, and instead of describing those regulations at length, we just refer to them. It's 603 CMR 41.02 to 41.03, which talks about the procedure for the termination of a district. Essentially what happens in that case is the school committee needs to petition the commissioner to create a long-range plan. The towns then have to submit to the commissioner their plans for taking care of the needs of their students, either as municipal districts or as some new regional district. And then that has to be approved by the commissioner before the district can be allowed to terminate. The other thing they wanted to make clear, and so that we need to make clear in the agreement, is the termination of the district does not terminate the current or future obligations of the towns that are part of the district. So this is not a exhaustive list, but those obligations include principal, interest on debt, OPEB, retiree benefits, and other obligations would continue based on the apportionment of costs at the time of termination of the district. Then moving on to section 8, budget. We actually had incorrect language in the agreement. It says that the budget could be passed by majority vote, but it really requires a 2/3 vote of the full committee. In leases, we had an incorrect legal citation. I don't know if that was incorrect in 1956, but that's no longer the current citation, so that's just been updated. And the recommendation was that signatories to leases be identified, so we've identified the school committee and the select board as the signatories. And then, thank you. And then in the section for incurring debt, there are 2 procedures available for the district to incur debt. The current version of, or the current language in the regional agreement is not consistent with either of the procedures that are currently allowed under statute. And so this just reflects what's known as option 1. Basically, the school committee would vote to take on debt, would notify the member towns. If the member towns did not schedule a vote to basically block the school committee from taking on debt within 60 days, then they'd be able to take on the debt. If they did, then everything would be on hold pending the outcome of the vote. And that is all of the changes to the agreement.
Just a couple quick things. On that last big part in the middle there, it says debt may not be incurred. There's a random period there that just kind of jumped out at me. Also, that 60 days, do both towns have to say that they don't want the debt to continue? Either town could.
I believe that either town could trigger the procedure, but I believe it is a district-wide vote. I don't believe it's town by town.
My understanding of that is that if one town rejects it, it terminates that. So either town can choose to reject it. And again, if they take no action, it's an implicit approval. But if they take action and they vote it down, I think a single no vote, because each town has to pay their obligation, and so one town can't bind the other one to an obligation. So if a single one says no, it's a no for that, is my understanding.
Thank you.
I have a question with the disclosure of CWC
Correct. I would say even without changes to the original agreement, since the end to that lease was negotiated, they would be free to do what they want. June 30th.
Just one more, I think we're missing Stony Hill from the list of schools.
That's what it is.
I do have some parents that reached out to me about in the preamble, where residents of the member towns who are enrolled in grades 6 through 12 shall attend schools in the district as designated by the committee. And then also later on page 1 through 3, at the top under middle school, residents of member towns in grades 6 through 8 shall attend schools within the district as designated by the committee. And I was asked that if the school committee decides we're going to move the 8th grade to the high school when it is not necessarily the will of the people in the towns, they see that as a potential way that something like this could happen that wouldn't involve the parents. Some suggestions have been made about ways to get some more transparency in here. Do we want to put something down that says if this happens, then this is the process the school committee will go through maybe, or do we want to do something like that? Because I think a lot of people are very wary of that, and I don't want anything to sabotage just getting passed. Any thoughts?
I don't know, I foresee that being very challenging. At the end of the day, at some point, somebody has to make a decision, and I think that might be the school committee with recommendations of the superintendent and his team, giving a presentation on what changes might be necessary for the best interest of the students. I don't think anyone, everyone on the committee is elected, right? And so that, everyone on the committee is beholden to the parents, and actually more than the parents, to all of the voters in the towns, right? So, I think it's our responsibility to be listening. But I think it would be very difficult to write into this a process that could be challenging and outdated. I think part of the reason that that's worded that way is, I don't think anyone plans to do that right now, but the future can bring circumstances that are
No,
unforeseen.
I'm just telling you,
You know what I
this
mean?
is something that parents have spoken to me about, and I just wanted to put it out there that there are people who are against that.
Bless you.
God bless you.
Can I talk about the elephant in the room? So if you make Wilbraham Middle School a regional school, you're asking Hamden to pay a portion of the capital costs, right? Why would we pay capital costs on a building we don't own? And we have no say in it, essentially. And if Wilbraham decides, or if the region decides to close that school in 5 or 10 years, what's our investment? How would I explain that to the town meeting?
Don, I think you'd have as much say as you would have at Minichog. You don't own Minichog either.
I understand that, we know own Minichog, and we know, but look, the argument would be, and I will take the argument that someone will be able, more people will be able to this. We didn't create this situation. You closed Thornton Burgess School. You made it so our kids went over there. And now you're asking us to bail you out because you didn't maintain your building for 10 or 12 or 20 years. And what do we get back for that? What do we get for our 20%? We don't own the building. If you decide to sell it or change it or do something else, what do we get? I mean, I believe that you need to change the regional agreement so that the school committee has an opportunity to put kids where they need to be to open overcrowding. But I see that as, I don't want to get Shakespearean and so, but that could be the death of Macbeth here.
If I can add a bit of flavor to this. In fact, I think it was myself, Peter Salerno, Marty O'Shea, Tim Connor started the whole idea of regionalizing the middle school back in 2013, 2014. So I have a lot of time invested into this, as a lot of you do, but I want this to pass as much as everybody else. At the same time, it needs to be fair to everybody, and to acknowledge you that it does. For the past 7 years or so, I think Wilbraham's really been generous. We haven't asked for any monies that we had to contribute to this building or add to this building. And Hamden students have had pretty much a free pass. And now as we move forward, we're just saying, help us share in the cost for the maintenance of it. We're not asking for any money to join the building or anything else.
We share the cost of maintenance now, because that's part of the
What
operating
we don't
budget.
share, what we don't share is the capital maintenance cost right now, and there's been Hamden students in it for the past 7 years, and we haven't asked for that, and we didn't expect it. But as we move forward, I think it's fair.
Hold it. You did ask for that. You closed Thornton Burgess School.
I never closed Thornton Burgess School.
Well, the committee did, and I don't want to relitigate this. All I'm telling you is, if I go to the town meeting and I say, you're gonna pay 20% of the capital cost of Wilbraham Middle School, they're gonna say, see you later with this deal, good luck to you. And they're also gonna say, didn't we take Thornton Burgess off their hands? Last night I saw a figure that said, you're saving $384,000 because we were taking away Thornton Burgess.
And if I may add, to say that Hamden doesn't have any say in it at all is, I think, is inaccurate, because it would have to pass a town meeting at both towns.
Exactly, and that's my point. You want this to pass, and it's not going to.
No, I'm talking about any capital costs.
Right, okay, but I guess my point is, do you want to get into that fight every time you need to, I don't know,
I hope
put
it's not
new
a
doors
fight.
on or fix a boiler or, you know?
Well, and I guess our concerns from a town perspective, and I don't want to speak for the entire board, I will say this, is that we're taking some risk that Hamden would be willing to maintain the building. So I think there's risk on both sides.
Well, I think we have a pretty good history of stepping up and maintaining the buildings when we need to maintain them and participating in that. I mean, we could have easily, with the Minichog, the last time we had 4 specific capital things, the town could have easily voted no on that, and they supported it. And the vocational education thing, when you had the fiber advisory committee over $100,000, Hamden supported that. So all I'm saying to you, I'd like to figure out an explanation to stand up in front of 400 people at the town meeting and say, this is a good deal because your kids go there, and we should do this. So I don't know how, I'm not that bright, so I don't know how to articulate that. Maybe someone could write the speech for me.
I thought that was a compelling argument, just that you just framed, just the way you said it. And I do want to mention that we have maintained the building, we're kind of waiting to see how the district decides to apportion the shares of addressing the mold issue that frankly kind of came out of nowhere because we had fixed, I was on capital planning 25 years ago when we were addressing the mold issue. And we put a new roof on, with the MSBA accelerated replacement program. So boilers and so forth. So we're looking at things that have to happen from this point forward. And I think it's completely reasonable, and I've spoken to your advisory group and so forth, that what we're asking for is you to participate as fully on that as you have with your children being in the building. I think if our positions were reversed, we would have some of the same questions, but I guess I'd be curious how you would frame it otherwise.
I don't think there is a way. I just don't know if, we know we have a strong vocal opposition group to anything that happens at the school.
Having been as engaged with this as Mr.
Yeah.
Ducey was back in the day.
That's the elephant in the room, so we need to figure it out.
And I guess the concern would be, would it not be appropriate for Wilbraham residents to raise the inverse question of where does it say in this agreement that the folks whose children are in the building are gonna share in those sorts of expenses, so.
That's an important point, I mean, you know.
Just to follow up on probably a more philosophical response than a tangible response is, the way I look at this is, if we want to have a unified regional school district, at least from 6 through 12, then we have to share in all the costs associated with that. So right now it's regional in name, and it's regionalized in cost at the high school level, and some of the operating costs obviously across the board. But I think if you want to regionalize middle through 12, and the only middle school that's operating in the district happens to be the middle school in Wilbraham right now, I don't see how you can otherwise say we're a unified regional district. So I think for me it's more about, we need to stop making this Hamden-Wilbraham and making this a unified regional school district. Just my thoughts.
I totally agree with that. I'm just trying to find the words that I need to say over the next 3 months to people why this is a good thing.
One other thing I would mention, and I don't know that it's been addressed, and I don't know that the regional agreement is the appropriate place to do it, but if Wilbraham Middle is a regional school, it needs to not be Wilbraham Middle School. It needs to be Hamden Wilbraham Regional Middle School, or whatever the appropriate change to that is, and I think that's part of the message that needs to be very much a piece of all of the ways in which we share this information out with both towns.
In fact, you might consider renaming it right to regional agreement.
I would think that would be real important, because otherwise the agreement's going to be out of date from day one. Maybe we have a competition to rename the school.
I have another, get off of that for a minute, but actually the same thing. Under 4, I think it's 4C, I guess. 4C, isn't 5,000 a little bit low for the capital cost? I mean, you buy a computer, it's $5,000 bucks.
That is the definition of capital that occurs in the regulation they directed us to. This actually is a regulation that is written specifically for vocational schools, but they said that is the best definition of capital from the state's perspective, so that's why that's in there.
Okay, the other question, is 4D in conflict with 3E, where it says when the district assigns students from any grade, that one says it'll be, you know, a portion, but 4D says all capital costs for all leased buildings will be responsibility of the towns in terms of the lease.
I don't quite follow you. Could you just walk me through a little more?
Okay, so on 3E, in the purple section, in the last paragraph, it says, when the district assigns students from any grades, both members of towns, to a single school building, when the single school building is leased building, right? That building will be a district-owned building, okay? And then you're going to portion the costs, right? But then 4D says capital costs for leased schools shall be the responsibility of the towns. So that's kind of like the way it is now. It's the responsibility of the town that owns at least, that is the leaseor.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a good observation. I'm not sure what the fate of this the old paragraph 23 was, the first paragraph you mentioned, but if that survives in some form, then I think this other paragraph would have to be modified to call that out as an exception.
To that point, Superintendent Provost, do you know where Jesse might recommend placing the apportioned lease building paragraph? Because theoretically, couldn't that paragraph be moved right underneath the D section that says that it's the responsibility of the town to add the exception to that clause?
I don't think we reached a conclusion on where they may want to have that. I mean, I honestly didn't pay a lot of attention to that because to me, as long as the part of the agreement doesn't reference another section, it doesn't change the meaning, I don't actually care where it shows up. But I think that would be a fine place for it.
Excuse me, are we talking about, so, section 4E, correct? Capital cost of district-owned equipment and property shall be apportioned to the member towns based on the ratio, right? Is that what we're talking about? D, capital cost for leases, is transferred to towns and
One more follow-up to the paragraph, sorry.
No, I haven't recognized. So I just wanted to say with respect to the paragraph that we're all talking about, the purple one, the one that may be moved, when this was created, one of the things that we had directed legal counsel for the school committee is that we were setting up this meeting basically to talk about the paragraph. So, I think there is, when you ask, so what are the magic words, I guess one of my responses would be is there another solution that works better? I mean, I think the reason all the parties are here tonight is to see if there's a way to maybe do it differently that might be more amenable to the residents of all towns.
If I may add something to that paragraph as well. It reads, when the district assigns students from any grades from both member towns to a single school building, comma, which single school building is a leased building, comma, why do you need that word verbiage between the commas?
Because we have another building where we assign all the schools, which is not a leased building, it's Minichog.
That's considered a district-owned building as well.
But we wanted to separate out the possibility for a building to be leased.
Okay, so that's specifically only for leased buildings?
Correct.
I would also suggest that this and the lease for the capital costs need to be the same figures. So, I don't know how we want to do that. I mean, if the lease says it's going to be a $25,000 repair before it's capital, and the regional agreement says $5,000 before it hits capital, there's a conflict there. Somehow we need to resolve that conflict. I don't know if I would include it in the regional agreement, because that takes a long time to change versus changing the lease. You might just address it to the lease.
So in regards to the paragraph we're talking about, 3E, is that intended only to apply to Wilbraham Middle School? And the second question is, I know at some point in the past, I've heard that there was discussion about an outright sale of Wilbraham Middle School to the district. What was the thought process around not going that route?
I would say to a certain extent that Hampton would have to pay for it, and we wouldn't. It just seemed messy, and I don't know that any of us feel like the building, if the building was the age of this building, it might be a different discussion, but I don't think any of us felt like that was a rabbit hole worth spending a lot of time going down.
But as I understand it, to go down that, the school district would then buy the building.
Yep.
Wilbraham's share of the purchase price would be, they own it, and then Hamden's share of the purchase price would then need to be assessed to Hamden, whatever fraction. Let's say it's worth $10 million, right? It would be $2 million. If it's worth $20 million, it would be $4 million. And then, it might be that that's not palatable, and then we could get a bond, and then, then there'd be payments, like for Minichog. I think, at least when we discussed it as a committee, we thought that this version might be more palatable because it would be less cost to Hampden, and Wilbraham is happy to not have us buy the building and have Hampden have to buy into it in addition to, you know, they're just looking for help with the ongoing capital expenses. The other thing that I think in our discussion that was a little unpalatable about the school district buying the building was like thinking about the future, right? 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Is there going to be a day when both of the towns come together and say, you know what, we want to build a new regional middle school, right? And then it would leave us, then there'd be, well, we'd have to, you know, there might be interest in putting it on the high school campus, right? And then, you know, then there'd be a question as to what to do with that building. And so it's been discussed, but I mean, I would love to hear more from you guys if that's something that you think that is more important to you or not, or, you know, I mean, what I hope to, and I told all my friends, you know, I hope to hear tonight that, you know, just kind of everybody kind of come together and, you know, come up with, you know, an agreement where everyone's maybe a little bit happy, maybe everyone's maybe only a little bit unhappy, and, you know, that we go forward and, you know, and not having to incur unnecessary costs.
Green Meadows.
Yeah, the other question was in relation to the way that the paragraph's written. It applies to, and I'll just read it. When the district assigns students from any grades from both member towns to a single school building. So if, sort of that apply to, I guess my original question was, does that apply to any time a student is from one town is placed into a building in another town? That the capital costs flip, or is that intended just for Wilbraham Middle School? Because as it's written right now, it really just says any school building.
To just go to your language, you said anytime a student is assigned, this isn't based on students, it's based on the assignment of the entire grade. So if we say all of the students in kindergarten or all of the students in any grade are going to be assigned to one building, then this would be activated.
Okay.
Is there discussion of calling out that, as you just phrased it, all the students in a grade versus, is there a way to just put the caveat of excluding students who are assigned due to special needs or other programmatic needs? I feel like the language is already in there.
I think it is, at the end it says, the fact that certain students from any of these grades may not be assigned or may be assigned elsewhere to accommodate such things as special education needs shall not affect this language. So I think it does call that out.
And just as another point, because it was raised about the fact that Desi's now telling us that $5,000 is the threshold for capital, that's a change to the lease agreement that we probably need to have some additional conversation about. I mean, is that going to change across all of the buildings that are leased by the district? Because that would change the equation about how a lot of capital costs are proportioned.
Well, this is a revision of the entire agreement. It's not a revision of just one building, so it would.
So all those leases would need to be revised.
Do we not have the option to put $25,000 in the regional agreement? Because I could foresee it getting a lot more complicated. I mean, there's going to be many, the capital list is going to be much longer because he's exactly correct. A computer plus a projector is going to go over $5,000.
We can ask that question.
So, and the way inflation is, I don't think we'll ever regret being higher than the state law. You know, right now 5,000 seems ridiculously low for the threshold, and 10 years from now, 25,000 will probably seem ridiculously low for the threshold.
So I think that this allows us to have a $5,000 project be considered capital, but we don't have to necessarily. So this hits a lower limit, but I don't think it obligates us to having $5,000 be considered a capital project. So it's a number of things that we buy regularly that are, more than $5,000. Half the software we use, is more than that. So, and we don't consider that a capital project. So I think this sets a sort of lower threshold for what is considered capital, but it doesn't bind us to, or require us to take anything that's in $5,000 or greater and call it capital. So I think we're still okay with it at 5,000, although I do think the question about the lease is different. And I think that does need to be omitted,
So
but
it sounds like you're suggesting that the leases could stay as they exist with the $25,000 threshold. I just foresee an awful lot of confusion between capital planning committees and the towns, and we don't want your capitalists to pick up the next $30,000 of expenses for all go crazy.
right, I think, the lease question is probably one that is best posed to legal counsel to sort of see what their thinking is around that. But I think that in regard to, the regional agreement, I think the way, capital projects are identified as they have to be at least $5,000, but again, like I said, it doesn't require us, if a project is $5,000, let's say we want to buy the plow for a plow truck, that might be $6,000. We're not compelled to put that on a capital planning project.
As long as there's uniformity in the way in which that threshold is applied for not across all of the buildings in both towns.
Right, and I'm not sure it has to necessarily be codified in the contract.
I just wonder why you need to be that specific in the regional agreement. Maybe Des is requiring, I don't know, but it seems to me it should be that specific in the regional agreement. Leave that to the leases.
I can answer that question. One of the observations they had is that in the current version of the agreement, capital expenses are described in 2 or 3 places, and the descriptions don't match. So they said, why don't you just go to the statute and use their definition of capital so that you have consistency within the document and you have consistency with the regulations.
Then maybe you just clarify it in the regional agreement where you say with a unit value of at least 5,000 and at least 1 year. To set it to be the minimum and not the absolute.
We talked about withdrawal. So, the town of Hampton invests $1 million in capital projects over the course of a few years into the Lumen Middle School. And then the region decides to sell the middle school, close it and sell it. What do I get back for my investment? And I guess my real question is, if the town votes no, that's it, right? You can't withdraw. Is that if one of the towns votes no?
Correct.
Okay. If one of the towns votes no on this agreement, what happens to it? Is this amended agreement?
Excuse me, one more point. Both towns could say yes and DESI could say no.
Which they probably will.
And to the question on the agreement, it has to pass in both towns in order to, and the school committee has to approve the final version as well.
And Desi has
And
to
the
approve.
commissioner has to approve it as well.
I'm just looking insurance policies, that's all.
To your question, I think it was unanswered. So what happens to the outstanding, assets as well as obligations? We did receive direct advice on that, which was not to try to spell that out in the agreement, because that will be an extensive negotiation between the towns and DESI, and there's really no way of determining where that will end up. What they recommended is just naming the procedure. So the procedure is the one identified in the regulations. The district ceases to exist. The school committee writes to the Department of Education requesting I think it's called a regional needs conference. The needs conference is convened, and as a part of that, it is, plans need to be developed to educate the students of both towns. Also, how you're going to take care of the obligations of the defunct district into the future, and also how you're going to discharge the assets.
Don, if I may just say, I'm pretty confident that if we move to a direction of a new middle school, and I'm not suggesting we are, but if there is ever a move to new middle school, Wilbraham's not gonna wanna invest more into the building either. I mean, we've gone through that with Minichog, we're going through that currently with uncertainties around Memorial, we're not sure, and we're investing only what we absolutely need to keep it watertight. So, we don't look to waste our money.
I just want to get answers to the questions. So be prepared. Become a good Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, be prepared.
One other mention, you alluded to the fact that if a new middle school was built and the region decided to sell the district, because this is just a lease arrangement, the district wouldn't be able to decide to sell the building.
Wilbraham.
It would fall in the town, yeah.
Pardon me, if I could. So I appreciate all the experience and of the people sitting at this table, so some of my questions may not be as experienced, but just a couple to verify something. My understanding is that, and this is getting to perhaps asking or how to present something to town meeting and the voters on this. Right now, all of the students in grades 6 through 8 attend Wilbraham Middle School. That's correct, and that's been the situation now exclusively for 3 school years.
First year.
This is the first year of it. So there was just previous to that, there were students who were still attending over at Green Meadows and Thornbridge. Okay. So is it accurate to say that the regional assessments at the, and I'll use 80-20% just for shorthand, this year will reflect 80-20% of operating costs at the middle school as part of the aggregate? Is that accurate?
The 80-20% operating cost at municipal, in the assessments.
In the assessment. So to go back to the question then of how does Hamden go to voters, I think a point to bring up, and I won't presume, I'm not trying to presume to tell you how to address your voters and your constituents, but I think the way that it could be done is to say, look, we're already committed to paying a 20% portion for the operating costs going forward. Wouldn't it seem fair to commit to paying 20% costs, or whatever is agreed to, of the capital costs going forward on the building? Because if there's nothing in there, then I find it difficult for the select board in Hamden to go to the voters in Wilbraham to go forward and say, well, we're reimbursed 80-20 on the operating, but all of the costs for the building will remain the responsibility of the taxpayers of Wilbraham, even though students from Hamden are enjoying that same privilege of going to that school. I think that's the opposite that makes it that much more difficult for the town of Wilbraham to approach it. Maybe it gets passed with the regional agreement without an apportionment specified, and Wilbraham's still responsible for the payment. But I think the first time that a capital need comes up that needs a vote of town meeting at Wilbraham Middle School, the question from any savvy voter at town meeting, never mind the leadership who months before would raise the question of why are we paying 100% when we have a split in the school? Why wouldn't we share the costs? So that may be a rather obvious point, but something that I think might help with the conversation.
I think something that will help with the conversation, when I look at the planning committee has been trying to set up a 5 or a 10-year plan for capital investments. And as I look over that list, almost everything on that list has something to do with the safety and the health of the people who are living and working in that building. All of the children in Hamden are going to be in that middle school. if we continue to postpone maintenance that is needed to keep water from seeping into that building, to keep the univents clear of dust and mold, the health of everybody living in that building is in jeopardy. And that would be all of your children in the middle school, because that's where they're all going to be. So that might help you. I don't see anything on that list that wouldn't be a major cost to the district that isn't related to the health or safety of the people who work and are educated in the building. So that might help, because all of your children are going to be getting a middle school education there. And we want to protect the health and safety of the people who are going to be in that building 6, 7 hours a day. Because it concerns me that the mold problem that existed, I'm not sure that that isn't going to come back if we don't invest in the doors and windows that are leaking like a sieve over there. I don't know how much damage was done to the univents that filtered the air that's recirculated in the building, and I think those are things that both towns ought to be willing to spend money to correct those situations, and as they set the priorities for what we're going to invest in the capital investment, I'm sure that the highest priority is going to be the envelope of our buildings, because when that deteriorates, everything inside the building ends up deteriorating, and the expense grows exponentially if you let those things continue to be delayed.
Thank you, Tim. That was a very helpful point.
Can I ask if we, would a sale of the property or the building, would that, let's not talk about price, right? With the sale of the building to the district, would that make this easier for you to get it passed through the towns, do you think? Or does it not change anything?
No, I don't think so, because that'd be,
Just turn on my phone.
no, I don't think so, because let's say the building sells for it, just to get, I mean, who's going to buy it? But just.
We will.
The
I'm not saying
region buys it for 20 million, and we're 20% of that, that's 4 million. That's,
Okay, what if it was $1? Hey, just follow me on this. What if it was $1? Okay, would that fix your problem if you could buy the building for $1? Would that fix the problem?
no, because it would still be the same problem. Then it would be a regional building,
Okay,
then we would have to pay. So,
right.
the,
So it has nothing to do with the sale of the building at all?
because we still, once it becomes a regional building, the tricky part is going to be where it says that the town still owns it, and we're going to pay 20% of the capital costs. I think that's going to be the rub. But I've been beat up before, so I'll sacrifice again.
As one of the Hamden residents, Hamden member of the school committee, I think it's a very fair, deal of what Wilbraham's asking for. You said, your comment was, what do I tell people we get for it? And the kids get to go to school there without buying a building, without paying a lease to go to the building, without paying rent to Wilbraham to go to the building. I mean, it seems only fair that we pay part of the payments. If somebody says, you can live in my house, and you're going to pay for some of the improvements going forward, if you're going to have a piece of it rent-free, you're living there rent-free. So it just seems that we're getting a good deal.
Don't get me wrong, I raise these questions because it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be public, and it needs to be said. So, you always, as elected official, you always know, no matter what you do, someone says, did you think about this? Did you think about that? Did you wonder about this? Well, we are. We're thinking, talking, wondering about it, and this is what we've come up with.
Do we think it could help? So on this sheet, I think everyone has one, right? It's the capital costs projected out until, let's say in realistic, until 2030. It's $7,065,000. Is this something maybe, I'm just trying to throw things out there to spark maybe some better idea with someone else. But maybe we say, okay, this and this cost here is something that maybe we agree that, that's something that Wilbraham might be their responsibility, and this and this and this and this could be something that would be shared, and then after 2030, moving on, it would be a 80-25, an 80-20 split. You see what I'm trying to say here? Like, are there certain costs, like let's say the external doors, like, maybe that's, I'm just spitballing here, I'm not codifying anything, I'm just saying that if maybe something like that, okay, Wilbraham would be something that Wilbraham would cover, but you think the HVAC and the power upgrades and stuff like that would be something, and we could just put it out here, decide it here. Is that an idea anyone's interested in, or does that spawn a better idea from somebody?
So I would say that I think to some degree the thought crossed my mind, and as tonight's conversation continues, the one concern I would have in either town, I think, is, let's say, first of all, from Wilbraham's side, now we're on the hook for the whole cost of a percentage of these, and I understand the logic you're presenting. So what happens if town meeting votes it down, and then we get to Tim's point? Now we're deteriorating a building where Hamden may have said, we're willing to pick up a share of it, but you guys aren't maintaining the original agreement. Because we can agree to certain things, and the town may agree in concept, but when the vote comes down to vote, if all of a sudden they decide they don't want to replace the exterior doors in your example, then everything else that was agreed to on 2030 and beyond really is secondary again. So just immediate thoughts.
No, I'm just trying to see if we could find an agreement, if this would spawn some other idea, or if anyone found any validity. I understand that.
So is the plan for the regional school district to, this is going to be was going to be presented to the town?
From my perspective, that's one of the things we're trying to figure out tonight. To me, it all comes down to this one paragraph. I think the rest of it, whether it's $5,000, $25,000, no one can care about that. But if we can't figure out a solution that works for both towns, for the middle school, then we're stuck.
And to build off what Tim said, again, this is a fundamental, like, how do the towns educate our children together? How is our relationship going forward? This is a roadmap for that.
I wanted to point out, Sean, you drew attention to the exterior doors and windows. Those are going to be hopefully assisted by the MSBA project. I don't think you guys have been involved in the discussions with that. Maybe if our assistant superintendent would comment about what our hopes are in regards to assistance with those projects.
Well, I think, it's kind of like the answer to the mass lottery, you can't win if you don't play. So we'll definitely submit for projects, because regardless of the conversation here, we want to reduce the burden. We've all, as members of the Commonwealth, anytime we pay sales tax, you've contributed to MSBA. So it's really about getting our piece of that back into our community. So I think that, we'll leverage and apply for those MSBA reimbursements kind of regardless in some respects, but it is a significant contribution to defraying the cost to the community. So they are worth pursuing, and we will pursue those, but I think that does ultimately lower that price tag. At the same time, it doesn't really get away from the real part of the conversation you're having about how much ownership of that capital is what both towns are comfortable with.
So I just want to make a point, just kind of on the record. So we have consensus here that we're okay with the period of time that most or now all of the middle school children from Hamden have been at Wilbraham Middle School, and we are hopeful that going forward, we could anticipate the split based on the proportionate of attendance for that building as has been for the district.
Obviously, I'm the only member here, so I'll have to bring it to my committee, so, we'll do that, and, I'll explain it, and I'm sure we can watch the YouTube thing, they can see the whole conversation, we'll go forward from there.
Anyone else? Any other comments, questions, concerns?
I just wanted to respond to a couple of things. Again, respectfully, not trying to tell you how to represent things, but when you mentioned
Everyone always starts the conversation with like that. I'm not telling you what to do, but.
But you referenced the $380,000 TWD as savings to the district, but who is that really savings to? You know, because that's going to show up in the assessments as savings to the town. So just so that's one way that could be framed. And I did want to, before this conversation is which I think is the most important conversation, I did want to go back to a possible response to Sean's question around, is this just sort of a trick to get 8th grade into the high school? And I think that from my perspective, one of the best responses to that is to go back to something that was made clear last time this was discussed last year, which is that without any change to the agreement, you could do that. You know, from 1956, I believe, if this language was in there, that could have happened. School committees could have made the decision to do it. School committees could have directed superintendents to do it, but no one has done that so far. So I think that the change of the language doesn't erode any protections against that happening, and I think the history has shown that the committee has been responsive to the will of the voters.
Well, thank you, John.
Just have a question, if you're able to answer it. I know that you were, came in with a goal to see about consensus this evening. Can you elaborate on what actual hard deadlines are for towns to offer their opinion, or what would be the process going forward here? Is there a scheduled vote of the school committee on the final version? What is the timeline for that, if you're able to share with that? Thank you.
Well, as you know, I'm just going to say this for everyone here. The attorneys from the towns are working right now on language from the agreement and for the warrants for the town meeting. So I think they're probably more in sync with what those deadlines would be than we are. I think, you know, if this is what we want to go with, then I think, you know, what I would imagine us doing is bringing back this version with the changes that were discussed tonight to school committee for their next meeting so that they could vote on it. And then sending it up to DESE for their hopeful final legal review. That I think would align with the deadlines we have from the towns. I know that we are working under some timelines in order to get warrants on the town meetings for both towns. I'm not exactly sure what those deadlines are, but I think if there aren't any major changes that you'd like us to make, then I think we're on track to make those deadlines.
And just going back to the specific issue of the apportionment for the capital costs, right now there is no specific carve-out for the Wilbraham Middle School as being a district building. Is that correct?
In the current agreement or in the proposed agreement?
In the proposed.
In the proposed agreement, the middle school would stay as a leased building, but capital costs would be treated as if it was a district building.
Thank you. Move to adjourn the select board meeting. Sorry, to reconvene an executive session at town hall, and to adjourn from executive session. We usually have some help.
All those in favor?
May I have a
Make the
motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second.
Okay, so we do the need for executive session pursuant to Mass General Law. Pursuant to Mass General Law, see Chapter 30A, 21A, 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with HWBA or negotiations that may make detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigated position of the public bodies, chairs, or lawyers. HWBA and AAC clerical contracts.
So moved.
Second. Okay, so we will do roll call to adjourn from, or to executive session, and we will be adjourning from regular session after executive session. Before we do, I'd like to thank all of our guests this evening, and the Board of Select members, and Wilbraham Board of Selectmen. Enjoy your day tomorrow.
Thank you very much.